Francis, who passed overnight. At least in my overnight, I'm not exactly sure when the Pope expired, but yesterday, Vice President Vance met with him in Rome. Was it yesterday or the day before? And then the next day, the Pope passed away. He's been ill for quite a while, in and out of the hospital. There's a picture of the Vice President and the Pope giving him the kind of look that a lot of us would give the Vice President. And it is.
Looks like this, almost like the side eye.
Yeah, it is. It is a little bit of it's like, oh, really? You're the vice president? But
Vance,
in
Vance was Catholic. He had just in, I think, a few years ago had converted to Catholicism, I think.
Yeah, and the vice president today saying, that he reaches out to all the Christians who are mourning, and it's not just Christians. I think that this Pope, with at least within the context, whether you're Catholic or not, within the context of the Catholic Church, was a very progressive Pope. That he angered a lot of Catholics because of that, because of his outreach on issues like immigration, on his trying to mend and create relations with Muslims around the world. He was a different kind of Pope, as he'd said he would be. He's the first Latin American. He's an Argentine. He came to the papacy at a time when Pope Benedict had resigned, which was a very unusual rite of passage within the Catholic Church and its leadership. And he took over from a decidedly different Pope in Benedict. Benedict was a really strict Catholic. He adhered to papal doctrine in a way that a lot of popes in the modern era might not have. A lot of cardinals who would ascend to the papacy. There you see Cardinal Ratzinger, who then became Pope Benedict. And so when Francis took over, it was a breath of fresh air to a lot of people looking from the outside. Not only that, the Catholic Church is having waning interest in parts of the world where it had most seen its success, in places in the Western world. And now to have had a Pope of Latin American descent who really was a different kind of, almost a no-frills Pope, coming off of Benedict, who wore everything you're supposed to wear, all the vestments of the papacy, and adhered to very, very conservative writings within papal thought processes. And so now the question is, where do they go from here? There will be a conclave with all the cardinals coming in from around the world. There are favorites, as there tend to be, and then there are question marks. There's where do they want to go? Kim, do they want to go to another part of the world? There is a Philippine cardinal whose name for the moment escapes me, but I will find it. I think it's Tagle, Tagle, I believe. Tagle, I don't know how it's pronounced. He is somebody who would be more in line with Pope Francis. He would be a continuation, it's seen that way. There's a cardinal in Marseille named Aveline, who is looked at a French person who is a French resident, the Cardinal of Marseille, who is looked at as somebody in the same vein as well? Or will they go with somebody who is a little bit more strict, a little bit more old order? And there are people that ride the fence there, and then there are Italian popes, and of course popes had always been Italian, or for a very long time were. And the question is, will they then go to an Italian pope? But this is, whatever you think of religion, whatever you think of the Catholic Church, it is in fact a focal point for many people in the world. The Catholics make up a huge part of the population in many parts of the world, but the Vatican is still looked at in a way for diplomacy, for getting a rubber stamp on legislation in countries around the world, and how we treat each other. Again, a lot of what they preach is backwards to a lot of people, but this Pope tried to move the church forward in many ways. And for that, I think he will be best remembered by people who are not Catholic, by people who look at the Catholic Church as kind of a little backwards in some ways. So he's going to be mourned by many.
We've not had a pope of a different race, right? There's been no Asian pope. There's been no black pope.
Correct. Correct. We
Yeah.
the popes really were Italian and only Italian, as far as I know, for a very long time. And the thought that, I remember when Pope John Paul II was a Polish, Karol Wojtyła was his name, I believe. But I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly as well. But Karol Wojtyła was in Krakow. He was the cardinal there, and it was massive news when they picked a Polish man to be the Pope. When
Mhm.
the cardinals got together and did that, of course, they would say Saint Peter picked him, and it was that sort of intervention that goes into the votes. If you saw the movie Conclave, by the way, a fun movie, a good
Hmm.
movie. And I know I'm not the movie guy, but it is really, it sort of tells you a little bit about, or shows you a little bit about what goes on behind the scenes at these conclaves. So all the cardinals come in from all over the world. They spend as much time as they need to in order to have a pope. There are many votes, and I should say there's a little breaking news on the Pope, but it's that he died of a what they're saying was a cerebral hemorrhage, I guess.
Oh, wow.
Let me
Which is
get that right.
interesting because he
Cerebral,
was
sorry, it was a cerebral stroke,
okay.
and that was the cause of
Yeah.
that was his cause of death. At seven, this is had not been shared. At 7:35 this morning, the Bishop of Rome, Francis, returned to the home of his father. That was what Kevin Farrell said at the announcement of the time, and then the Vatican's top doctor now saying that Francis died of a cerebral stroke that put him into a coma and led to irreversible heart failure. The death was confirmed Monday by Dr. Andrea Arcangeli, the head of the Vatican's health department. In a statement, he noted that Francis also suffered from episodes of respiratory insufficiency and had bilateral pneumonia, as well as type 2 diabetes and hypertension.
Mhm.
Francis died Monday at 7:30 a.m. Vatican time. So a cerebral stroke that led to failure. The Pope, the Vatican will organize this next conclave, and a pope will be named after days of. And here you see this is the path to the papacy. The
Mhm.
Catholic Church mourns the passing of Francis. Attention turns to the Vatican, where preparations are underway for the conclave to elect the successor. Of course, we all know the white smoke signals a new pope, and then somebody comes in and onto the balcony and says "Habemus Papam," which in Latin means "we have a pope." And we will see who that pope is. As a sideline, I know they talk about gambling here on the show once in a while, and I'm part of those. I was in a papal pool last time where
Oh, cool.
they grouped a bunch of cardinals, and you just sort of bought a group of cardinals, and if your pope wins, I mean it's luck of the draw. If your pope wins, then you win the pool. You can gamble on anything, including the conclave, which is a great thing.
We had a couple comments that I thought might be pertinent. Vanessa says, Pope Francis appointed most of the bishops who will be voting on his replacement, so there's a good chance that the next pope will be like him. Also, and I think
Yeah,
that
I don't know. I mean, I don't doubt that, but I don't. I think it's just cardinals that, I mean, maybe he did that
Mhm,
too. I don't know enough about it, but
I don't
only the
either.
cardinals
Yeah.
get to vote. But that's true. It's sort of so we're
Mhm.
seeing it here, right? When you appoint enough of the judges, they rule in your favor. So
Exactly. Vicky, I don't think Vicky's alone in saying that she liked the Pope, even though she's not Catholic. I think a lot of people like this Pope and his message.
yeah, I do. And I saw something from Tammy as well, where it says it's sad I'm not Catholic, but I thought highly of him and his messages to the world. I do.
Right.
I think that was what was, the people that would look at the papacy and the Catholic
Mhm.
Church and all of that as sort of otherworldly for a long time, with rules and regulations that seemed certainly past their prime, if ever they were to have had a prime. I think people who look at that saw this Pope as kind of holding the hand of the church and moving it into the next generation, and looking at people. Look, he chose the name Francis because of Saint Francis of Assisi, who took care of all creatures great and small, and that seemed to be what his motivation was as Pope, and certainly when he took that name. So I think that it's unusual. Yeah, and Katie Lynch says, I was surprised that Francis was the first Jesuit Pope. Yeah, I think so too. I think within the Catholic Church, maybe Jesuits are looked at as sort of otherworldly, the way that people outside of the church look at Catholics or any religion in general, if you're not immersed in it. So I think that's true. It is a little surprising, but that's definitely what motivated a lot of his practice, and that's how he was the person who was chosen. But in Argentina, that's who he was among the people of Buenos Aires. That's what he was known as there, as this kind of different flavor of Pope. He didn't want all of the the pomp and circumstances of the papacy. He wanted just to do well and kind of bring the church into the modern era. To that, I mean, he may have done that. It really, I think, will depend on who his successor is and whether or not, if I forget who it was who wrote in and said it, if in fact the people that are voting on him are going to vote in a way to continue this, then they have a few options apparently within the maybe Tony, can you bring up the list of the gambling on the popes thing there, who the favorites are?
There's a lot of talk in the chat about conspiracies about whether Vance played a role in this, but I think the Pope was really not well.
He was not
Yeah,
well. I mean, it was
yeah.
clear he was not well. He'd been in the hospital. I can't. So it looks like Panolin is and he's sort of a centrist. He's a little bit old Pope, a little bit new Pope. He's one of the sort of top diplomats within the Vatican. And Tagle is the Filipino man who I mentioned earlier, who would be a lot more like Pope Francis. And then those other two, I have to confess to not being. Who's the last one there? I can't even read that last one. Is that Mark?
I can't see it either.
Okay. If he's the
Maybe he
one
can
from
blow it up.
Marseille, I know that the one from Marseille is also a top pick. But again, we don't know anything. We're just looking at what the odds are here on Odds Checker.
Odds Checker.
Yeah, and I'm not even sure that that's the guy from. I don't even know if that's the guy from Marseille, just because his name is Mark, spelled like a Frenchman. But yeah, I think that it's something to watch, and it's a spectacle, and it is a horse race. Yes, in fact, John, it's a horse race. It always is when these papal conclaves happen, but they're interesting and they capture the world. And every reporter I know who I had a few friends who were reporters who were in the Vatican while the Pope was sick, and they were there for weeks because there was a time a month or so ago, maybe it was a bit longer ago, where it seemed like the Pope was not going to survive when he had that bilateral pneumonia, which means you have it in both lungs. And so here's Vilma saying that I love this Pope, and I'm very sad, and I'm a Catholic. Pope Francis was a very decent man and a compassionate Christian, which is what I think a lot of people saw in this Pope that perhaps they didn't see in Pope Benedict and maybe even Pope John Paul II, but I don't know enough. I do remember when John Paul II became Pope, they had elected John Paul I, who took over the papacy from John VI, and he took over Paul VI. Sorry, he took over and he served for a month, and there were all these beliefs that he was poisoned, and nobody knew what happened. And the Pope, then they had to all the cardinals had to return a month later to the Vatican, and they had to elect another Pope, and then just thereafter, it was during when that Pope was named, when Pope John Paul II was named, the New York Times was on strike, and there was somebody issuing, like every other day, they were putting out something called Not the New York Times in New York with the same font, and it was sort of a precursor to The Onion, to be honest. And the headline was, after Pope John Paul II was named, the headline read, "Pope dies yet again, Cardinals return from airport." And I thought, I was very young, but I thought that was hysterical when I read that. The strike was settled and a Pope came. And so, yeah, there will be a pope, and it's fascinating. Like it's a good story to pay attention to if you want to distract yourself from all the stories that we are paying attention to now, just because of how it's done and the solemnity and the attention it's going to get. I mean, this is the first, well, maybe not that's not true, but the second pope named in the era of social media. So it will be interesting to watch. So I urge that. It's a little distraction. And yeah, that movie Conclave was very good. I liked it. Oh, yeah, look at that. Pope dies yet again. Yep, Cardinals are
There it is.
remember it correctly. Yeah. Reign is briefest ever. It was just not the New York Times was great because it made everybody laugh for the months of that strike.
Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.